We are talking about 11 point something trillion shillings in debt. What is it that you point out in terms of social accountability that you tell people like this?
We don't have leaders. We are people who see the country as an animal which must be brought down then shared. And that's what we are doing right now. We are busy sharing.
We have leaders who have vision, only that their vision is private vision that supersedes public good.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is our fourth and final debate on this series, Kenya's Eurobond debt debate. And the key thing, as we're saying, is weighing Kenya's financial future. And in this series, we have talked a lot about the debt, or how we got where we are at. But now we would like to focus on ensuring government accountability for acquired debt. Ensuring government accountability for acquired debt. In an era marked by unprecedented economic challenges and political complexities, the responsibility falls upon us to dissect the mechanisms through which citizens can effectively hold their governments accountable for public debt. In this debate, we will focus mostly on how citizens can engage in matters of governance, particularly concerning fiscal policy and debt management, as well as ensuring that they are keeping the government to task. To help us through this debate, some of the esteemed panelists include Eric Kinaga at the end, who is head of programs at the Institute of Social Accountability, TISA. He is also, in terms of social justice practitioner with 9 years experience in program development and management, in terms of grant making, running successful advocacy campaigns, fundraising, and research. Next to him is Professor Gitile Naituli, who is a business management and leadership development expert with us in the panel as well. Joining us in the audience are students from KEMU, NIBS, as well as ZTech and KCA universities, and also Multimedia University as well. Let us debate. So, Prof, to kick us off, I asked you this off camera, and I would like us to debate it so that they can also hear. My question was to you, what exactly do you emphasize most on leadership when you get to trainings like this?
Yeah, first, I think, there is no leadership, first of all, without followership. For you to achieve followership, you must have what is called a shared vision. You must have a vision of how you want, say, for example, Kenya to look like in the future. And then you have to be able to enlist support. In other words, to communicate that message appropriately. I think if some of you, you remember a public address in a very difficult situation in America delivered by Martin Luther King. He told them that he has been at the mountaintop and he had seen the promised land when they had serious problems of racial discrimination. But he proceeded to tell them how that promised land will look like. He said, in the promised land, when you arrive there, you will not be judged by the color of your skin, but the content of your character. Now, this is the picture he gave them, and that picture was sellable. So here, in this country of ours, the vision part, our leaders, they don't have, they lack it in totality, okay? Because if I ask any of you to tell me what is the vision of any of the leaders, whether it's the president or it's a deputy or whatever, you won't be able to define it. Of course, we know there is bottom up and there is the Asola thing, but we also see the taxes coming, they are not supporting that. They are completely indifferent. So the vision thing is a big challenge for us here. The other challenge is the ability of a leader to feel the pain of the people you are leading. We have not been able to produce that, okay? And we know the leaders who felt pain. Mandela, for years, felt the pain of his people. He wanted a South Africa that is united, he wanted to create the rainbow nation, okay? Where both the white and the black are free to pursue perfection as individuals. He created that. Okay, he didn't come. When he became president, he neither stole nor did he insist on staying forever. He set them and he was able to release. We are not able to produce a Nyerere. See, Nyerere loved Tanzania so much that he was able to create unity among 256 tribes. And today, the Tanzanian nation, within 10 years from now, the Tanzanian will have to bypass Kenya because they have solid cultural grounding. So it's easy to put economic roots on that kind of a situation. So as opposite now, just giving you a few examples, you can see Captain Sankara, there's fellow they murdered in Burkina Faso. They have another Sankara now, they are always doing very well, if you are in touch. But so ourselves, we created hunters and gatherers. We don't have leaders, okay? We are people who see the country as an animal which must be brought down and then shared. And that's what we are doing right now. We are busy sharing, okay? You see the euro bond there. You understand, for many years, that money never came to Kenya, by the way. It was shared outside the country, okay? I mean, I get that from the...
That remains to be, that is an outstanding question, because it depends with what Eurobond you're referring to, but all right, yeah.
So what stays is here, we started, I think, our country wrong with absolute selfishness and leader need to be selfless, okay? There are two types. You can have what is called a transactional leader who does everything for the self. If this project doesn't pay me, it's not done. And you have transformational leaders who do things for the next generation. So you have two things. You have what we have, our political class who looks at the next election, whether they are going to be able to buy you and win or not. A leader will look at the next generation. How will the next generation of Kenyans look like? So every investment being done today, every policy decision is looking at the next generation, not the current one. So this is our weakness as a people, and that's what I tell, because these are the leaders. And that's what I tell them to start now. Thinking how they would like Kenya to look like for their children and their grandchildren. Because my generation has ruined yours. And we can't recover because all we know is how to collect. We are gatherers. All we know is how to gather. We don't know how to feed the cow. We only know how to milk. So you people need to be different.
He talked about milking the cow, and this cow has been milked for a while. We are talking about 11-point-something trillion shillings in debt. What is it that you point out in terms of social accountability that you tell people like this?
Thanks. Allow me to just piggyback on something that Prof has mentioned. I think they say that things don't go wrong, they start wrong. And I think that's part of our history as a country. When you go back to the history you were taught, I realized that you were taught revisionist history. And I want to encourage Kenyans to go back to what our history truly is. You know, as simple as one that is easily forgotten, the Kapenguria 6. Probably there are people who may struggle to count them off their heads. But even so, there's part of that history that has been tucked behind our national discourse. And the fact that even inside Kapenguria, those prisoners had different rights. There are those that were more animals than others, as George Orwell would say in his book, The Animal Farm. And I think that's part of where we went wrong, and I think tied into what Prof was mentioning about our contemporaries in the East African region, notably Tanzania, and how they've been able to consolidate as a country, especially culturally. I think I also sort of agree in terms of, and sort of actually maybe disagree that we don't have leaders with vision. I think we do, and I think Prof has mentioned about it, that we have leaders who have vision, only that their vision is private vision that supersedes public good. And if you look back at the history of this country, the last 10 years plus, they are replete by instances where private interests have superseded public good, which now we've seen the most popular term that's been thrown around, which existed before the ones who are now mentioning it realized state capture. State capture is really where you repurpose public good to serve private interests. And when you look at our debt challenge as a country, it's punctuated by two things. Private interests that have superseded public good, that's a first, and I think perhaps our biggest problem, because if you're the head of your family and you do not have the best interest of that family at hand, you can imagine what the kids will become. So it does not even matter what your neighbors are like. Are your neighbors thieves? Are they out to fleece you? It doesn't matter. If inside the home you do not have the best interests of that household at heart, I think that's perhaps the biggest challenge we have in this country, and we've had for the last couple of years. But the second problem is a global financial and debt architecture that is warped and biased against the global south. You have frameworks such as the IMF. IMF is almost like a glorified circle where countries become members and they have weighted voting rights. But there are countries that have greater influence within the IMF than others, notably, of course, the US that has about 17% weighted voting rights against other countries. So what does that mean? That the IMF, which has been regarded as a lender of last resort, cannot advance the interest of countries, and you have it's part of a global, it sits at the helm of a global financial and debt architecture, which was established before countries in Asia, countries in Africa got their independence. So they never existed. So they came and found an architecture that already exists that is biased against them. And so part of the things we've seen around debt accumulation across the globe, because you're not just the only country that is in debt distress, a lot of the issues can be attributed back to the challenges with the global financial and debt architecture.
All right, Prof, you wanted to jump in.
I want to jump in because, I like when you say that you give the example of the family. That's a perfect example. Now, we didn't have a leader with a vision here. One, Mwai Kibaki. Mwai Kibaki came in, then he understood that if you want to grow the economy, you need to put money into people's pockets, because the economy is two-way. It's production and consumption. Without consumption, there can't be production. So you cannot remove money from people and expect the economy to grow. You can't. So what he didn't do, he decided the interest rate must go down. Right now, interest rate is over 20%. He decided it must go down. So how is it going to go down? He called them banks, told them what is happening is not sustainable, and he needed their cooperation. They refused to cooperate. So when they refused to cooperate, he called the people working in the Ministry of Planning and Finance. And that time, he had who is who in Kenya. He had credible cabinet, okay? You had Anyang' Nyong'o in planning, you had Raila in roads, you had Mwiraria in finance. So these people came and they decided to license micro enterprises to be banks. Overnight, the banks were selling money in the streets. Okay? Now, he didn't do that for himself. He did it for Kenya. That is what I'm saying. Now, people can have platitudes. The talk is very cheap. We won't do this, we won't do that, but you're not doing any of that. So, problem has been the transactional nature. You see, I started by talking about producing leaders who are hunters and gatherers, as opposed to farmers. A farmer, you give him 1 kilo of maize, you give him 90 kilograms. You give him one cow, he will nurture and give you several cows. An hunter just brings down what he finds and he takes home. Okay? So this is the reason why we want to set up productive enterprises like Kenya Pipeline. Why would the Kenya Pipeline lose money? Because there is no day we are not pumping that fuel. Why would you sell KICC, for example? But you can't hit Kenya Pipeline unless you sell it, the equivalent of changing the animal. You can't hit the KICC until you sell it. So the idea of adding value to the asset which you have found, you cannot find that idea in somebody who has a hunter mentality and a hunter and gatherer mentality. So we have more hunters and gatherers than more farmers in leadership. The opposite of that, which the students now of leadership will tell you, is when you are transactional. When your objective is self-aggrandizement, then you can't be a good father. Because if you are going to buy a banana for your child or milk, and the child, you don't see the benefit from it, you rather starve the poor fellow to death. Okay? And that's what happens here. You should not be having a problem of debt. Okay? It is there. I know we will go to that in debate, so I'm not going there yet. So you have a father who doesn't care about you. A father who only cares. Now, my colleague is saying something extremely important about the beginning. Our beginning was very wrong. Extremely wrong. We started with our colonial government. You see, our government has never changed from the colonial government. What defines our colonial government? Exploitation. A colonial government is about exploiting you, not building you. So when the Muzungu was here, he exploited us and he took wherever he could to Europe. So when Kenyatta one came, he became Muzungu par excellence. His job was never to build anyone, it was never to bring us together as a people, was never to build Kenya. The progress we made under Kenyatta one was coincidental. So he grabbed all the shambas he could get. He introduced corruption, which is now we are having now. Remember Nyerere started well, and that country is moving. Even when it veers off, it indeed under Kikwete. When Magufuli came, it was easy to return it to the road, to the proper path. But here, there is no path to return it to. We started in the wrong one. Then when Kibaki came, I think alikuwa mezeka, and also the years, so he wasn't able to return. But Kibaki did well. So the problem also was that when the Muzungu came here, is like he overdrew our culture. Okay? Because what you can give a country as a leader is your love and commitment. Now, you can't give what you don't have. So where do you get love? You get it from the family unity. That's why I'm so happy that he was giving family as an example. Now, some of our leaders are people of dubious backgrounds. You try to trace when the Muzungu came, he came with a different culture. So who went to church? The lower class. The people who are not really proper Africans. I mean, they were there, every society as an underclass. These are the people who became Christians. These are the people who got education. These are the people who became your leaders. These are the Mobutu Sesekos, India Means, Findro Mbakosas, and then home here. Okay, and that's why Kibaki stands out as indifferent. Because Kibaki and the proper upbringing, so he was able to have sufficient love not to steal from you. Because Kibaki never stole from you. There were thieves in Kibaki's government. But he was not one of them. Okay, so this idea he is bringing about the family is an idea of the love that the leader can bestow on his people. Protect you. So why are we having IMF? Kibaki and gotten the end of IMF. Within 2 years, we are financing our budget 100% without borrowing. How did the IMF come back? It came back because of our father who doesn't care about the children. Because when there is piverage, when the resources you are producing are being stolen, then the IMF will have to come in. Otherwise, you will collapse. your economy will collapse, and they don't want to collapse. Even our neighbors wouldn't want to collapse. So they come in to lend, and then they lend you very painfully. You become a client state. You now become a beggar. And that's what we are today. Without them right now, this economy would have collapsed. Trust me. And that is why we are pound in debt over debt. Okay? But they are not nice. And they don't have to. Because people take care of themselves. People don't take care of others. So they take care of their interest. So they continue lending you at a higher and higher interest rate. Sasa unakwama, unakaa hapo kwa debt. You are now done. You are now mine. I can make you move any way you want. And that's why IMF right now is actually going to be even a bigger burden. Unless something can dramatically change. And it's not impossible to change if somehow we can produce someone like that boy of 27 years. What is his name? The boy from Burkina Faso. Maybe one of these days, these young people here, one of them will be Ibrahim. And then suddenly the country becomes the fastest growing country in Africa. Okay? Because nothing is being stolen. This thing we call corruption. Corruption is a polite word for describing theft. If that were to stop, this is a very rich country. It's a wealthy country. Remember, Kibaki took only 1 year to recover 24 years of total mess. 1 year. That's how strong this country is. So all we have to do is to love our children. It's the leader to consider you as his, to consider the country as the head of the family of that country. And I have so much love that is not going to allow exploitation of any nature. That way, within a year, you recover. When you are out of school, there is jobs for you because we are at the same level with some of these countries which are now gone. Malaysia is gone, is developed. 1975, Kenyatta gave Malaysia $5 million because they were poorer than us. But then, they are the leaders with the farmer mentality. Okay, as opposed to us, with the leaders with the armed and gatherer mentality.
He has highlighted some of the issues that you might be able to point out on this. That what are the potential economic and social, as well as social and political consequences of unchecked government borrowing and accumulation of the debt in terms of the urgency of citizen action at the moment?
I think there are a number of consequences. I think one of the consequences of unchecked government borrowing is of course rise in debt. And what rise in debt means is that you do not have any leg room as a country to finance public services. And what does that mean for an average Kenyan? It means that if the university was getting funding to be able to accommodate 10,000, now it means it can only accommodate 5,000. So what happens to 5,000? One of the questions that really baffles me about this country is that we really don't ask hard enough where the people who do the KCPE and never join Form 1, where they go. Because we don't have a 100% attrition rate, even at the point where the government was saying they've achieved reduced attrition rates to, transition was at 100, you could see pockets of people who are missing out. There are people who miss out when they do their KCSE, the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education, and don't transition to the universities, don't transition to the tertiary institutions. Where do they end up? So when you have debt increasing as it is in this country at the moment, is that you're crowding out the financing of public services. That's a first. The second bit is that you continue to, the level of accountability, you have a high accountability deficit. What do I mean by this? Where people sit back because they also feel a sense of helplessness. And I think one of the things that is currently, bedeviling our country is the issue of citizen apathy. You have people complaining, but also feeling a sense of hopelessness, not feeling like they can actually do anything. Never mind that there's something that citizens can do. But when you have a sense of lethargy among citizens, what happens is that you open up the gap for even more accountability challenges, where people can wake up like people have woken up in this country and decided that now we need an expressway, or we need an SGR, and we are proceeding regardless of what other people think, or regardless of what feasibility studies show, because that's part of the history. I think those are some of the consequences. Of course, the third consequence is that we will continue to be colonized, because you see, if you have countries that are more developed out there, what has been happening since we got our independence is a new form of colonization. And we've seen this in many ways. And one of the ways that we've continued to be colonized is through the past. And I think the most basic example I could give here is in Proverbs 22:7, I think, that talks about the rich is a master to the lender. He that lends you is he that borrows is a slave to the one that gives. So when you have a country that is not able to finance what it wants, then you have a country that is perpetuating chronic poverty. And let me just pause here and unpack for us what chronic poverty is, because one of the things that fascinated me when I was doing my master's in development studies is a new form of poverty. I always knew that poverty is a lack of material goods, until I learned that poverty is actually connected to esteem and human and other forms of human development that contribute to loss of dignity. In this country, there are people who are so poor, they can't look at you in the eye. And that should worry us. There are families in this country, and we've seen that in the report by KNBS on the multidimensional poverty index, which is loosely, I think the simplest way to define it is, whichever way you look at that person, they are poor. Whether you look at them from one angle or the other, they're actually poor. So what does that mean? It means that when you go back to some of those families, there are certain things that their forefathers or forebearers did not get. When you're not able to access education, and that's part of the inequality challenge, because this country is very progressive. We have one of the progressive constitutional frameworks. I think that now has become a cliche. But one of the things we don't talk a lot enough about is that this country is one of the most unequal countries on earth. In terms of the inequality index. The people who control the wealth in this country cannot even fit in a ward, which is the lowest electoral governance unit in this country. So what does that mean? It means that you're continuing to lock out multiple generations of people who cannot be able to access fundamental goods. And one of them, I think, is education. When you have a family that cannot be able to access education because the financing has reduced, so if they needed to go to school, they would need to travel maybe 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers. It means that those who may not be able to afford, or when it's not free, it's not accessible to them, it means that you're locking out not just a generation, but another longer generation. And you have the whole problem of not just functional literacy, but you also have the other challenge of political illiteracy. And I think, and when that happens, the country continues to be expropriated, because developed countries will not wait for us to put our act together. They will continue to come and ravage. We've seen that across the continent. There is now a new emerging conversation on Africa mining vision, where the proponents are saying, if as a country you have natural resources but you don't have the capacity to exploit them, you don't have to wait for the developed countries to come and exploit. Wait until you have built the capacity so that you're able to benefit from the resources that you have. But what is happening to countries like DRC and other countries across the globe? Some of the countries that are most endowed with natural resources also happen to be the most poorest. And I think there's a very direct correlation. Why? Because if you don't put your act together as a country, you continue to be plundered by those who are actively seeking out for the new frontiers for their own industrialization.
Prof, same question to you. What are the potential economic, social, and political consequences of unchecked debt?
Well, the consequences is that you get abused. I want to give you an example as an abuse. For example, there is this huge government project that must be done, come rain, come shine, the housing. okay, the housing project. The government declares it's illegal, and then they go to Parliament. And then Article 10 mandates you to have a say. So how many of us went and said, this is not our priority? Okay? A priority is medicine in the nearest dispensary. A priority is the doctors who have not been employed. Because look, we are right now having a doctor strike. Okay? I mean, that's where we send our most brainy Kenyans. We send them to medicine so they can come and serve us. But that is not our priority. And that does not worry you. Okay, because if it does, then you will be insisting, the accountability comes in, you will be insisting to your government that our priority is not this housing thing. We would like to contribute the money then to employ the doctors if you can't employ them, to have medicine in hospitals. Because right now, you walk to any government facility, you go to an hospital anywhere, even in Nairobi. The best thing you can do is to get a prescription, then you go and fill it outside. You would like to fill that prescription where you got it, because that's what your tax is paying for. But we don't feel the pain enough. The last election, 8 million of you did not vote. That is a home government, because Ruto got 7.1 million, 7.1. So another 8 million is outside there where you could have elected Traore. You understand? But you didn't, because you did not participate. So the consequences of knowing our priorities, okay? What is affecting us, because if we know what you want, then we are not enforcing it, okay? We don't hold the people to account. We don't hold the people who give responsibility to account. For the last 11 years now, 11 and a half, you actually did not have a parliament. Parliament is the people's representative. These are people who are supposed to speak for you. And what the parliament is supposed to do, to check the executive, so that the judiciary checks both parliament and the executive. In the last 11 years, has the executive taken anything to parliament which it has rejected? None. Meaning that, you alluded to state capture. But why? Because citizens, to be able to say, you do that, I'll punish you by removing you, by taking away the job that I gave you. Okay? So there's serious consequences when we don't seriously participate, when we don't seriously define our priorities. Because there is no priorities here. We went on demonstrations. 72 Kenyans lost their lives in those demonstrations. A lot more were injured. What were demonstrations about? Cost of living. When the report came out, did you see the cost of living there? Now, did you see any demonstration from your institute, from ordinary Kenyans saying, wait a minute, where is the cost of living? So, the citizens themselves, we carry big responsibility for what is happening to us. Okay? Very big.
Considering the potential economic, both social and political ramifications of unchecked government borrowing and debt accumulation as well, how urgent is the need for citizens like who are in here to take action and to ensure accountability to mitigate adverse consequences?
The urgency is really there in a very big way, if you want me to answer that. You see what happens, for example, the moment the Jubilee administration came in, there are two things which happened. First, they wanted to steal money outright. The Constitution, provisions of the Constitution, I don't remember the specific article, is that any money raised by the Kenyan government, whether through taxes or on borrowing, must hit the consolidated fund and therefore appropriated by our parliament, by the people's representative. They changed the Finance Act to allow them to use the money outside Kenya. Then they borrowed it, then they issued the Euro bond. Then they did have to bring the money here. Okay, they borrowed it there. Now, The Auditor General the other day told us that the current government has borrowed 3 trillion in 1 year, in 1.5 years. And she said she can't trace that money, which project it has funded. Did you see any Kenyan demonstrating? Did you see Kenyan saying that, wait a minute, there is a violation of law here? Because the law says the money borrowed must be strictly borrowed for development. Therefore, tied to a specific project. Did you see any of us? Did you see even the politicians? The one now pretending to be on the other side. Did you see them raising an issue? Saying, where has this money gone? So that, the consequences of that is we become poorer and poorer. There was no reason for us, for example, to build the SGR. First, it was overpriced. SGR, a lot of Kenyans don't know, that contract was negotiated by the Nusumukate government. That Nusumukate government is the equivalent of government of national unity. That government negotiated a contract to build SGR from Mombasa to Malaba for 150 billion. Okay? When Uhuru Kenyatta and his friend came, his brother, they reopened that contract with the same people to increase the money up once to 537 billion. Now you have basically what amount to a white elephant, because you have to imagine the current cost that something, that is 6 billion. So now try to divide that money on the Kenyan roads. You could have and do a carriage from Mombasa to Mandera through Hola and open that area completely. And you know the output of our road is not the same as output of our railway line. The road brings you more profit because with it comes eateries, petrol stations, increase in land rates. With the railway, even in the railway station is guarded. When you go in there, you go in there. There is very little that happens. Where the person is shaking the ground, you must move further and further away from it. Okay? So imagine what that money could have done if you were asked. You would have told them to make and do a carriage from Nairobi to Malaba and open that area, 6-line highway. Open it completely. Mombasa to Mandera, through Ola, open that area. From Nairobi to Moyale, and you are still left with the money. But that one, they are not able to take enough. So what do? They do a project which they can take. They make a project that there is enough to gather for themselves. Because the citizens are not sufficiently alert. They are not willing. Because you see, the whole thing had to be self-protection. When the leaders are not taking that role. So the consequences will get poorer. We will get poorer. There will be more joblessness. Okay? When I was graduating in your age, we used to be employed even before you finish. In fact, I don't know which day I wasn't. Some of us who don't have business acumen to go to start a business, you got employed. Those with business acumen, because there was people to consume your service. Okay, today, even if you go and open a kinyosi, you will see that not many people will shape their hair twice a week because you can't afford it. So you must do it like on Thursday. That's when I save mine. Or you go on Thursday, you do it, and then you do it next Thursday. Then you will do it every day. So you will support the small business and it will grow. The consequence, we will get poorer and poorer.
Same question, Eric. We're talking about making sure that this generation is actually aware of what is happening.
Yeah, so I think it's, to answer the question, it's very urgent. And you know, sometimes, I think that sometimes the challenge that we have is that people don't know what they are up against. And maybe that explains why we don't feel the fierce urgency of now across the populace. But our situation is quite dire as a country. It's quite dire as a country. I think we are entering now the 3rd year in a row where our debt servicing costs will be overtaking government recurrent expenditure for the third time since Kenya's independence. That should worry us, because what it means is if you're here and you have parents, you have older folks at home who are retiring and they've been paying for their pension. You know, there's a pension deduction happening over the course of their working life. They won't be getting that money. I think you may know already cases of people who've retired and have not gotten their pension, or it gets very delayed. It's because what government has been doing for the last couple of years is there's something called CFS, Consolidated Fund Services. Every time when a budget is prepared, there are things that are non-negotiables. The first is debt servicing costs. The second one is pensions, and of course other payouts, and of course we have the equitable share. So if you've seen, so what has happened is debt servicing has taken the lion's share of our budget. First of all, debt servicing is the lion's share of the consolidated fund services. So after the government has repaid our debt, it does not even have money to finance other consolidated fund services like pensions, like equitable share. That's why we've seen over the last couple of years, there's been a tussle between the national government and the Council of Governors, because money is not getting to counties as soon as it ought to get. Why? Because where is the money? There's a time as the institute we were working on division of revenue, and we were arguing why a county is always bypassed every year before a budget is read. And so we went to court, and we had a case that was successful in court, where the court ruled that every year before a budget is read, the division of revenue conversations must be completed so that counties know what is their rightful share. But the more we delved on that issue in 2019, the more we realized we were looking at the wrong place. Because the question was, why are the two levels of government fighting? It's because there is no money. So increasingly, there's actually no more money to do the things that government was set up to do. And I invite us to go back to the history of government, because in the history of mankind, we didn't always have government. Government, as Thomas Hobbes in his book, The Leviathan, writes, there was a state of nature that existed before government. It was a man-eat-man society, and so people decided to cede some of their powers and latitudes to a higher authority, which they call the Leviathan, which is now what we call government. But when you have a government that is no longer serving the needs of the people who gave up that right, then it is your duty, your patriotic duty, to be able to ensure that that government does not see the light of day. And I think that explains, if you juxtapose it to the US context, for instance, on the gun control and why it's a big issue. It's because they believe that you should own a gun, if not for any other reason, at least to defend yourself from the government if it decides to go rogue. And I think that explains why it's a big conversation in the US. But coming back home, we have more taxes coming our way. We've just seen the government, the president has assented the Housing, the Affordable Act. We have levies coming our way. When you look at the budget policy statement this year, there's additional revenue. For any person who is earning, they're about to lose about 27,000 more than they lost in the last year, just by the additional revenue measures. Even before the finance bill has come out, we already seen, because it's about 324 billion that the government is proposing to collect as additional revenue. And the question is, where is it coming from? We've seen government being very lazy in revenue collection in the last couple of years. Instead of going to untapped places like wealth creation, taxing, for example, net worth, for instance, which is part of wealth taxes and other issues. What the government has been doing is taxing consumption. That's why you've seen, and it's a very lazy way of taxing consumption, because if you increase VAT on fuel, which has a multiplier effect in the economy, then what it means is that more households are actually going to get affected as the issue continues. So we've seen, again, why it's also an urgent issue is because unemployment is going to continue rising. Anyone who works in the business space will notice that more companies are taking a backseat. They're not very excited in investing If you saw the Business Daily, was it today or, yeah, I think today morning, I saw it today morning, about KCB, the first time in 21 years that they're not giving dividends payout. What does that tell you in terms of what the country we are becoming? Last year in April, something interesting happened that never carried the waves or media interest. For, I think, 3 banks, where their credit rating was downgraded by the Moody's. Allow me not to mention the banks, just I invite us to go and check. Yeah, they were downgraded in terms of credit rating. And those are banks that carry the weight of this country. But what is the question? The question is, what's the implication? And I invite us to go and check what those banks are. What the implication of that is because those banks have exceeded the amount of money they should have invested in the securities market. The reason why bonds are earning 18% interest rate, and if you look at the East African of the bonds issuances that happen every week, they are averaging at between 11 and 12%. So why are we getting at 18%? Why? Because the government is increasingly becoming rogue, so the market is treating government as a high-risk lender. Number 2 is that more banks that are now investing have actually exceeded the ratio, but the government still requires more money. So what happens is, if we were to have the unfortunate situation of going the Ghana route, and Ghana is a country that Kenya has learned a lot from, both governance and even in the issuance of the Eurobond. Today we are discussing the Eurobond, and the first Eurobond we floated in this country was in 2014. And amongst the countries we were looking up to was Ghana. And when you look at a list of countries that had been indicated as red alerts and likely to default on their loans, majority of those, I think about 99% of the countries have defaulted. The only country that is on the list is Kenya. Repaid our Eurobond, which is not completely true because we still have a payment coming up in June, and that is just the payment for 2014. We haven't even begun to discuss the other Eurobond. Kenya has at least 5 Eurobonds. 7, yeah? 7 Eurobonds that we've listed. The one we're discussing now is mostly around the first Eurobond, which has created shockwaves. And as you know, we repaid that Eurobond, which was at 6.8% with a higher interest rate. So we're actually getting ourselves deeper into the hole that we've been on. And all the Eurobonds that we've now issued so far have been punctuated with transparency safeguards. So meaning that Kenyans increasingly, since 2014 to date, have not been getting value out of the money that has been raised purportedly for public good. And what that means is, at one point, those who are working hard to get into the employment space, there won't be a place to go to. And there probably won't be food to eat because, as you know, about between 29 and 33 out of 47 counties are actually regarded as arid lands and semi-arid lands. So what that means is that food security will continue, even a bigger problem in the country. We've not done any much investment in agriculture. It was quite unfortunate to see the BPS, the budget policy statement that came out recently. A lot of the plans that were in the plan by Kenya Kwanza have not materialized. When you look at the promises they're making in agriculture, never mind that they had committed that agriculture was a low-hanging fruit in their manifesto. Those issues and promises have been decimated. They're nowhere in the budget policy statement. And if they're not in the budget policy statement, you can be assured that they will not be implemented in this year. So I think we are edging closer as a country to a place where they say, when the poor have nothing to eat, they will eat the rich. So depending on how you look at it, it may be both a good or a bad thing. Thank you.
All right, so I would like to open the floor now to some of the questions from the audience. I think there is Dr. Mutegi who had a question. Let's get our mics ready. Abdi from Kemo, also prepare yourself. Elijah from KCA and Gure from KCA. Do we have Dr. Mutemi here?
Yes, and as they prepare, there's also some 3 interesting questions here from Leon. Where's Leon? And Daniel Barasa. And of course, Rafael. You have some interesting questions as the other prepares. So let's start with the first one.
Abdi, where are you? Seems Dr. Mutegi is not with us. Up here.
name is Abdi from Kemu University. My question is for the professor. What might be the reason that Kenya would rather take loan for infrastructure than save for infrastructure?
Now, the primary reason why we borrow is so that we can still have of it. Because you see,
Do you have any evidence to that end, though?
trust me, if the money we borrow, we strictly invest what it has been borrowed for appropriately, we will not be in any debt. Okay? In fact, debt we are having, most of them we should not pay. We should not be paying. Because there are two types of debt. There is what is called a sovereign debt. A sovereign debt you will have to pay. There is also what is called a regime debt. So what's the difference between the two? A sovereign debt is a debt whose contract to borrow is approved by the people's represented by the Kenya Parliament. Okay? A sovereign debt is a debt money arising from that borrowing enters the consolidated fund and is appropriated by the people's representative, the parliament. A regime debt is a debt which the contract is secret and the money never came to Kenya. Okay? For example, the money for SNGR, nobody should be paying it. That money, the contract is secret. The minister, the current minister, when he was appointed, he told us, you will make that contract public within 2 weeks. After taking office, did he make it public? He never did. The money never came here. The money moved from Exim Bank in China to China Road and branches in China. Okay? So meaning that if our government today were to say that have issues on that project, it is overvalued, and you move to the International Court of Justice, you ask them to help you to pay value for that money. You will pay less than 150 billion. You will find that you have already overpaid that in debt. Okay? So the same can be said for the Euro bond, of which money never came. And then, of course, you see, your government is telling you that they have paid. They have not paid anything. They have just kicked the can downstairs. You see, when you borrow, at 10, the Euro bond was borrowed, the 2 billion was borrowed at 6%. Okay? And that was considered very high then, extremely high. The one they have borrowed now is 10.7380%. Now it's extremely high. That one will be paid in 2038, I think. So all you have done is to kick the can. You haven't really paid anything. So now why I started with a very heavy statement. I said the reason why we borrow, because we don't have to. Okay? Kibaki was doing everything with our money here. Kibaki left office with 1.8 trillion accumulated all the way from independence. So this borrowing we are talking about started in 2013. So you can see, you can answer your own question from there. You can see that we have enough resources to do our thing if only we can stop stealing from ourselves.
All right. So, Sharon. Prof will keep the responses a bit shorter.
Yes.
3 minutes.
Yes.
Sharon, where are you? He's not here. Elijah?
I'm Elijah Nyakuni from KCA. I have 2 questions. The first question, what are the measures to take place to ensure that there's value for money? As Prof is clearly indicating that there's no value for money. Either you cannot say this, the money used where, or who used this money where. Then the next question is that, what can a country do to avoid information asymmetry so that the government doesn't have the secret, yet the debt is ours? Thank you so much.
You take, Eric, you take the measures to get value for money. Prof, you take to avoid the secrecy, the government secrecy in terms of a loan. Eric, let's start with you.
I think what you can do to get value for money is the simplest way is be accountable. Because the examples that have been given here on the SGR, for example, part of the reason why the coalition government did not proceed with the SGR, which was identified as a blueprint project under the Vision 2030, was because they felt that Kenya was not able to finance the project using its own tax revenues. And so they were like, this is one of the things that is important, but not a priority. Let's push it forward until the country is able to mobilize the revenues required to be able to finance it. So I think, and even when the revising was done from 167 billion to 357 billion of the SGR, there were feasibility studies that came out that showed that the SGR as designed in the revised plan was not feasible. But what did the government do? They proceeded to construct it. And we've seen that one of the things I think has punctuated our public service has been a culture of impunity. I think the last 10, 11 years, what we've seen is the failure to honor court rulings, for example, court orders, because there were rulings to that effect that this has been sanctioned by the courts, but then we see the country continuing to proceed with that. So I think one of the ways the stopgap measure really, which I think is a very sustainable and has its roots in our constitutional framework, is accountability. We have Articles 273 that speaks about the principles of public service. And one of them is accountability, be able to get from the views from the people who are the beneficiaries, and if they're contravening thoughts, then listen to them. And we don't see a lot of this within the public service, and perhaps it's because of how our politics is calibrated. If a question is targeted to the president, even before he answers, and you're his tribesman, you want to actually hit the person asking the question before, sort of like that whole gatekeeping, which is an ethnic mobilization and the use of politics as a mobilization tool. I think the second one is, let's respect our institutions, because we have the institution under Article 229 of our Constitution, the Office of the Auditor General, that is mandated to check. And one of the mandates under that provision is that the Office of the Auditor General is mandated to check whether money has been used lawfully and effectively. So the lawful is where they check financial statements to check whether they align with they provide a true and fair position of the financial standing. But the effectiveness component is where you're asking the question of value for money. This building may have been built and was built within the confines of the law, but maybe this is not what the beneficiaries needed at this point in time. So the question is, so that's why the issue of value for money. Was it effective? Was it a priority at that point? And I think we have those provisions within our framework under the Office of the Auditor General, and which has mandated. I think they've even released a number of audit reports in the last couple of years on Eurobonds and other performance audits across the Kenyan sector.
Prof, you had highlighted it earlier, secrecy in the government in terms of these contracts. What can we do to avoid it?
I think it's simply follow the law, look at Article 10, sub-Article 2, about accountability and transparency, okay? If we follow the law, the government becomes transparent. And I think you are referring to Article 232, not 273, it's Article 232, on the values and principles of public service. Okay, and then the national values in Article 10. Those are the demand that the government be transparent. For example, the Auditor General, in talking about the 3 trillion, she said she can't tell which project they were supposed to fund or which one they funded. You see now, there is secrecy there, okay? We allow our government to submit the SGR alone, even though the contract is secret, because the law is not being followed. And then saying even when you go to court, because you can go to court, I think it's under Article 47, to force the government, which it has been done. And the court has ruled that agreement to be made public. It has not been made public. So we need to reach the level where the law becomes God to us, where we simply need to live by the rule of law, not just mouth it. So the government feels that it doesn't have to. Now, why does the government feel like that? That is where responsibility now lags to force. For example, you see Article 1, It says the power belongs to you, to the people of Kenya. That those holding authority is by delegation. Now, if you can give the power, you should not be able to take it back. So we need to demand that the parliament pass a law determining how we can recall a government which goes wrong without waiting for 5 years. Because you see, if the power belongs to us, we give it to you, and you are not deserving us. For example, you are ending all these contracts, because I mean, does Parliament know how the 3 trillion was borrowed? It doesn't. Does the Parliament know how the money for SGR was borrowed? It does not know. Okay? So how do we then, as citizens, when the Parliament, which is supposed to work for us, is not working for us, because the Parliament should demand those things, how do we invoke Article 1 call on government before 5 years? I think for us, we need to insist that there be an enabling legislation to enable us to act on Article 1.
All right. There's also a question from Gure. Gure, where are you?
Guri from KCA University. So the late Professor Gitile Naituli said that there will come a time where a nation's interest will supersede that of an individual. The time is yet to come, but hopefully it's going to come soon. The question is, should our country continue borrowing considering the current financial architecture of the global lending organizations like the IMF? Because you said, one of you alluded to the global financing architectures being that it's the way it's priced, it disservices developing countries like African countries, because you find that African countries, when you are going to them for a loan, we end up paying high interest considering that we really need the money compared to, let's say, countries like the United States, Britain, France. So they end up paying lower interest compared to us, and we really need the money while they need it less than us. The second question is the lack of accountability among our leaders due to public disinformation, or is it just the way our leaders are? Because there's a law actually in the Constitution that mandates members of our constituency to recall a member of parliament. It's the recall. So members of our constituency can recall a member of parliament, but many people don't know about that law. So is it because the citizens have not been sensitized about the Constitution and their powers within the Constitution, or is it just the nature of our leadership and the nature of our politics in Kenya?
Eric, take the first question. Prof takes the second part of the MP, I think. Do you start with the MP?
I want to start with whether we really should borrow. Because the truth of the matter is that we should not be borrowing anything. Okay? The reason is, how would you stop borrowing? You control your expenditure. Look at your own home, your house. As a student, you have a budget for food, you have some for entertainment. When things are getting a little serious, you also have saved something to go back home. You stop using here, the one you don't need. For example, is it fair for you to be funding these ministers to fly with the helicopters all over Kenya? I mean, are they so sick that they can't go to Naivasha on a vehicle or anywhere else? Okay? You see, the government expenditure is actually the problem. The problem is not the debt. The problem is we are not using public money as personal money. There is absolutely no reason. When you look at it, for example, for your president to go to issue title deeds, and job that can be done by land clerk in the area where those titles are required, there is no reason for your president to go and launch a construction worthy 20 million, and in the process use 200 million. So all we are saying is this: if your government can control expenditure, because I trust this government can be run with 2 trillion, not 4. Okay? Not 4 trillion, then you don't have to borrow. You are borrowing because you have a reckless father. Okay? You have a fellow who wants to go drinking when there is no food at home. And then the fellow goes for entertainment. You understand? You are the fellow who is going to feed with sukuma wiki and ugali, and then the fellow is eating meat in the bar with the other men and buying them beers. That is the problem. We actually don't have to borrow, and Kibaki demonstrated that this country does not have to borrow. You see, there's no difference between the KK government and Jubilee. This is Jubilee phase 2. Because the problem you have, they started with the Jubilee phase 1, and then we are continuing in Jubilee phase 2.
Prof, they're not here to defend themselves, so kindly let us avoid that. Eric, in terms of lack of, is it that we cannot be? Is it that there is disinformation, or is it that we are not? It's not in our nature naturally to be able to call to account members of parliament or even some of the officers in government who should be able to be in charge of our debt?
I think I'll start with the last question. Is it in our nature? And how to, I think my answer is partly yes, or largely yes. One of the tools of colonialism that was used and advanced by our colonial masters was education. And so education, first of all, until I'm sure a good number of us may know that Kenyans, Africans and whites in this country before independence had different sets of education. There is, depending on who you are you black or white, there's what you could advance. And one of the things that was not taught in our schools was critical thinking. Even with the advent of TVETs and how they were established, it was largely around ensuring that people have the technical skills to do the work that is needed in the white settler farms and that sort of thing, but not necessarily to question. And I think part of that is a colonial imperative that we have carried with us in this country for the last couple of years. Where if you're not taught to ask why, then you never ask. Even as a parent at home, if you don't teach your kids to ask you why, we're not generating a sense of critical consciousness where people are able to give a reason why things are happening the way they're happening. Like for example, Prof has just given an example of why would someone leave Nairobi to Naivasha in a chopper? If you don't ask why, but instead of asking why, you are there wondering when your time will come. Because that's part of the other problem we have in this country, that even those who are not in government are actually looters in waiting. So you have us here challenging government, but when we get into those seats, we become the very people that we are fighting against. Or we were challenging. So is it in our nature? Partly yes, and I think there's a lot of learning that we need to do for ourselves. It has taken me such a long time, I think the last 8 years, to try and go back to Kenya's history, because we have buried our true freedom fighters in this country. We have buried those who are patriotic. We don't know their names. Maybe I'd invite someone in the panel here to tell me who David Munyakei was. Anyone who can tell me quickly who David Munyakei was? Anyone, just lift your hand up if you know who David Munyakei was. See? David Munyakei is a guy who blew up the Goldenberg scandal. But we are a country that knows Kamlesh Patni. We don't know David Munyakei. And that tells you every other scandal, at the heart of every scandal that has been the can has been lifted in this country, was a patriotic Kenyan who loved this country enough to be able to say that, hey, there's something happening here. So, is it in our nature? I think partly yes, but there are Kenyans who have been able to rise above it and have loved their country more than themselves. But I think there's a level of madness that is required for us to get to a place where we are able to save this country. And I think what gives me a lot of hope is remembering that those who fought for these countries were not the majority. You may go back to your history and you realize that some of your grandfathers, even though they look very respectable, were actually home guards. Or you go and find that they were actually freedom fighters. It means that there are Kenyans in our past history who stuck out their necks, and we can also be that generation that sticks out our necks for the sake of our country. I think the second question was, should we borrow considering the global financial architecture? Partly yes and no. Yes, because there are ongoing mechanisms to reform the global financial and debt architecture. There are a number of mechanisms that are going around in the continent, and I think That's a good thing for the continent. But no, because I agree with Prof that we need to cut our expenditures. And the way government does its budgeting, we need to move away from expenditure ceilings for ministries, departments, and agencies and adopt zero-based budgeting, which enables ministries to make a case every year. But no, what we've been doing in this country is every year you take last year's expenditures, you factor inflation, you say this is a budget. That's how now we have a 4 trillion plus budget, because we just use, which is a very lazy way of doing budgeting. Let ministries unpack from, you assume that every ministry, department, and agency has zero. Give a case for everything you're trying to put in the budget, and we build it from the ground up. That way you will realize, like Prof is saying, we should not be running anywhere close to a 4 trillion budget. And that way, because part of the reason why we have accumulated debt is because for the last 11 years, we've been running deficit budgets. We've not been having balanced budgets. So every year you have to borrow to be able to finance the budget deficit. And then we keep increasing that deficit on top of last year's deficit, and it becomes very unsustainable.
Prof, you seemed like you wanted to jump in. Just 2 minutes.
I just did it very quickly. You see, I like that. You corrected, we are not that bad. I think this is a question of leadership. Because Kibaki did some very few things which had serious financial implications. For example, he banned education trips. He said, we hired you because you know what you are doing. So the money budgeted for education back to the treasury, okay? Then he said, if you can't have a meeting in your bond room, then you must have it in a government institution. The government has a lot of hotels which they are trying to buy now. Have it there. Number two, he said foreign trips, I will approve them personally. You remember the Auditor General telling us that these fellows used 20 billion in 3 months in foreign trips, okay? So this country has plenty. All we need is another Kibaki. We have plenty of resources.
Leon, where are you? Leon?
My name is Leon Munge from KCA University. My question was, what is the relationship between public debt and cultural practices, or rather cultural values?
Let's take another one. Relationship between debt and cultural practices. You take that, Prof. Barasa, where are you?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Barasa Daniel from KCA. So I have like 2 questions.
Just one, so that we can allow room for others.
They're short. For the are macroeconomic theories adopted by Kenya effective to us falling into debt?
Could you lift your mic higher?
The second one, like the first one was, microeconomic theories, are they influential to us being in debt? Then 2, you've said of us voting. I think Kenyans have started seeing the act of not voting since there is Vifarango computer. Why do we cast votes? Yes, they are already casted. Why do we cast again? Like, we are going to vote what has already been voted for. We know the leader. Who is the leader?
I'm not sure that is the question for this forum.
It is, since he talked of voting.
Let's start with the initial question, the relationship between debt and our culture. Prof.
I think our casa has a lot to do with what we are doing. I said I'm very happy about that question. Because you see, we are actually collectively wired differently, okay? Like you remember I started telling you there are 4 parameters that define leaders. You can have a hunter-gatherer mind, or you can have a farmer mind. So you approach leadership either as a farmer or a hunter-gatherer. The difference is this: when you are a hunter-gatherer, you will take away. You will not grow. If you don't grow, you will have to borrow, my friend. Now, does our culture take us in that direction? Yes, it does. You see, I think I will be a little bit crude here. There are culture, some of our cultures, they encourage us not to think a lot, not to think about the consequences. I grew up looking after cows. When you look after cows, the cows literally think for you. You know, you open that manyatta, you open and you follow them. Remember, you are not leading. What are you doing? You are following. They know exactly when to arrive at the river. They know when to come back. They know when they should be milked. If you haven't gone and start milking, they will call you. But once they know you have started with one, they are very patient. They wait. They know you come to them. Now, that creates a lazy mind. Okay? It creates a mind whose intention is usually, remember also, then when you are a huntsman, I'm just trying to go to culture now. That's my culture. First, you don't even plant a tree. Okay? You go with the cows where there is grass, you graze, you finish, and then you ask yourself, when I came here, ilinyesa wapi next? So that you simply move there. That's why there was a problem when Moi was a president. He used to appoint you to a parastatal that was doing well. You eat it and finish. And then you are taken into another one that is now doing well. And people are saying, what is he doing? Okay, to him, he needs to take you where there is grass. He can't take you where there is nothing. His culture does not allow that, does not bring. So our culture can be a limiting factor, okay? For those who have taken some courses in management, you know there are people disposed, okay? We say that you have a higher need for achievement, or you have a higher need for recognition. So some of us, we answer that collectively, okay? I used to test theory of recognition with my first year students, for example. I'll tell them to volunteer for class rep, and all the laws will put up their hand automatically, okay? So the idea of higher need for this, higher need for achievement, higher need for recognition, it filters when you go to management. And this is what could be a difference. Although there is always in gray areas. For example, Uhuru should have done better than Kibaki. He didn't. Uhuru behaved exactly like a hunter gatherer. Even though the community he hails from is supposed to have a farmer mentality. Somebody who can grow an economy. Now you can excuse William, the way he's behaving is perfect. Okay? He's answering it to that cultural thing about the taking. Because you are supposed to take. You see, why we even have problem with the cattle rustling is because in their mind, it's not stealing, it's taking. You only steal if you take from the members of your community. When you are taking to non-members of your community, you are not stealing, you are taking. So when you are taking from Kenya, are you stealing? When it's from Kenya, in your mind, you are not stealing. Because it does not belong to any member of your community. So our culture has a lot to do on how we behave in management, because we may not even know that we are doing wrong. The other one is interferes with the planning. Our mind, our nomadic communities, we don't plan anything. We never planned anything because there was no reason for it. We have very huge land to roam over. So you don't plan. You just wake up the same day you did yesterday. There are other people who are forced who they must plan because there is scarcity. So you must plan how to use those scarce resources properly. So when you become president from my background, it is very easy for you to think the resources are completely unlimited. It's very difficult to think that you are having scarce resources and then use them any way you want. So there is an impact, a huge impact from culture, from how we have been grown up, how we are socialized. Even the tribalism is actually informed in socialization. That's why somebody will just hire like the other day. I mean, you saw the court declared 1,406 people hired from 2 communities. Only the court is saying this is illegal. It's illegal because the law Article 232 does not allow. So that is the problem. The problem we are facing is also we have not transcended our culture. So we are not taking Kenya as our tribe.
There was a second question on that from Barasa.
I think the linkage between debt and culture, I think just to add, I invite us to check the KNBS study on household debt, and you'll see there's a correlation between household debt and public debt. Kenyan households are households that are good at borrowing than saving. And I think, that's part of our reality. You'd ask, for example, why do we have all these mobile lending platforms? Why are they thriving? Because they have market. And so imagine if you're the person that moves from Mshwari to KCB to Tala to Branch, you're oscillating between those two, and then one day you become our president. That's our leaders. I can see a few people. Maybe they can relate, but that's a context. I think household debt are quite high in terms of their levels, and I think there's a direct correlation between how we manage personal finance and personal debt to how we look at personal public debt. I think there's a direct correlation there, which I think is an area that has not been studied, but the data is out there. It just needs to be triangulated, and you'll see that. I think in terms of, there's a question about macroeconomic theories that influence our debt. I think yes. A lot of even development theories, growth theories, we have the growth model, for example, which we are learning in the global south, but it was not curated for the global south. We have a lot of theories, especially around development and economic growth, that were never meant for the African context, but were largely meant for the post-war period, where you saw the collapse of big economies, including Britain, and we had the US coming up with a Marshall Plan, and there was there are a number of theories that were framed around that period, which have continued to be advanced and advocated in this part of the world, which are not aligned to our context. And part of our context is the high poverty levels, for example, which is quite a bit different, and that's the need for welfare mechanisms. And I think the most recent that we've seen is fiscal consolidation conditions being pushed by the IMF to Kenya and to countries like Kenya, where they're supposed to adopt austerity measures, which means reducing spending to social services or to social sectors. So if you have austerity, which means reducing funding to education, what does that mean? For a country that is already unequal, it means you're increasing the inequality even higher. But yet, there's austerity for this country that would not work for the US. And I think one of the austerity that would work in this country is curbing public spending on unnecessary issues like what Prof was talking about. So don't cut spending to education, but cut spending to State House. People don't need to be hosted in meetings in those places as often as we see. People don't need to travel as often as we see them traveling. And I think there are austerity measures that can be curated to be aligned to our lived experiences as a country. On to the very last question, I think on the voting, I think why should we vote? I think that's within the realm of political science. I invite you to check out a quote by Bertolt Brecht, who said on the political literacy, he says, the worst form of the illiterate is a political illiterate who does not understand or who does not see the reason why things are, you're not able to see the connection between your vote to why we have an abandoned child or homeless child on the streets, because they are all connected. Because the vote explains why we have multinational corporations trying to repatriate their profits out of this country. Because at the end of the day, I think the political illiteracy question is perhaps we have a lot of, I think in the region as a country, we have very high literacy levels higher literacy levels compared to our contemporaries. But you'd be amazed when that data of literacy levels is juxtaposed with developed countries. So in this country, we are dealing with two problems of illiteracy. Functional illiteracy, those are people who can't read and write. They are still in our midst. But the other bigger problem are people who are very educated and informed, but are politically illiterate. They're not able to see how the decisions at the vote affect, or the inability to participate in an election affect the choice of leaders who they end up with. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in there because there is no one coming to save us, and there's a storm coming. Thanks.
All right, Prof, for the same, the question on why bother to vote.
Yes. I wanted to look for a good year on that.
You can do that. You can do that as we take the next round.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you see why you need to bother to vote. You need to understand this, that leadership is literally everything. Okay? One day, the Emir of the United Arab Emirates was asked, what is the secret for your success? Okay? He told them that his country is not comparable with Nigeria. Nigeria has more oil. In fact, I think it's number 4 in the world in terms of output and also deposits. Then it has good climate for growing food. You can't grow food over there unless you create your own environment. Okay, so Nigeria literally is heaven on earth compared to United Arab Emirates. But United Arab Emirates is better than Nigeria. Difference, leadership. That is the difference. Okay, so why you need to vote? Because you need to elect that leader who will make sure that you move forward. You see, there is a connection between what you eat, where you sleep, with the leader you elected. Trust me, that person is determining everything today and determining what you eat and where, because when the economy shrinks, that means there will be no job for you because the economy did not expand. We just talked about the microeconomic policies which constrict the economy, which they force on us, and those policies, like he told you, which can expand the economy. So, my friend, you must participate. And then the good I was looking is, I don't remember from where it is, he said that the failure to participate in political affairs of your country enables you to be led by your inferiors because you are not able to make a choice. I told 80 million of us did not vote in the last election. That 80 million, you know, they say a binding government is elected by good citizens who don't vote. They are the ones who elect that binding government. So it's extremely important that you participate. You get that vote. Of course, there has been nonsense here about stealing elections and all that. Election can never be stolen. Ours especially can't be stolen today because this is the beginning and ending in the polling station. All you have to do is you make sure you protect that vote and get the Form 34A and move with it to court. These fellows, when they went to court, they were asked by those judges to give them 10 Form 34As from any polling station in Kenya whose result differ. They didn't have that difference. So it's crucial that you participate in electing a government.
All right, next round of questions. Raphael, where are you? Raphael, all right.
Thank you. I'm Raphael from the Nairobi Institute. My question is to Prof. What do you do when your government and your judicial system actually collaborate? Like in most cases, you find that they are reading from the same page. What constitutional criteria do I have to use to really hold my government accountable for the debts? Thank you.
All right, next question, Irakiza. Irakiza.
My question was, in the current situation in Kenya, do you think it's capable of funding its own expenditure without going back to borrowing?
All right, so let's start there. Is Kenya capable to handle its expenditure without borrowing?
Yes, it is. All they have to do is do a kibaki. Make sure that if you need to have a meeting, you have a boardroom, have it there. Okay? Remember the benchmarking trips, or which are eating your money. It's one time when the MCAs from Magueni went to Israel. And then the farmer told them, what we are doing here, we landed in Magueni. You understand? Anyone remember that? So, all you have to do is to be prudent as a government and use public money with care. Okay? And putting public money with care means that you don't spend money that was not budgeted and then approved by Parliament. Strictly follow the Financial Management Act. And the biggest expender of your money here is actually your government. If the government can control its expenditure, we don't need to borrow. Kibaki demonstrated that. And this is how he did it. He said you will approve any foreign trips personally. That means you must go to foreign trip that you can account for them benefiting back to Kenya. Okay? Then he said these education trips we make. And you know, I can give you an example of how I discovered this waste. When I was a commissioner for national cohesion, I wanted to go to my daughter's graduation in UK. So I asked the CEO to give me 14 days in Mombasa, because you go to Mombasa at 18,200 shillings, you will raise the ticket easily. And then the fellow told me, just wait for me, I'll come to your office. And when he came to the office, he had a letter and mission to go and stand some management in Arusha, in Tanzania. That gives you $7,200, $720, I think, per day. So I took the money. I went to Tanzania. But what did I go to learn in Tanzania, which I wasn't going to learn here in Kenya? Do you understand that? Do you understand how the government can stop all that useless expenditure? Stay in the office and do your work. You have heard about inspection of development projects. Which project are you inspecting? You are not a road engineer. You are not a civil engineer. You are not a quantity surveyor. So all you do is you stay in the office and you wait for the report from the experts. You have a bond in your office. The bond says in county 1, there is this project with the different stages of development. In county number 12, there is this project. You call your minister. You tell him, I want a report on the status of this project. Then the minister calls the relevant expert, okay, on the project. And then you get properly updated. So the way we use the money is the problem. Look at the budget for Parliament. It's over 300 billion. What is the share for the county? It's about that. How can you budget 1 billion per person? Those guys are 300 something. Okay? And then you look at the budget of the State House and the presidency. I think they have separated the two now. When you add that together, you are probably approaching the Ministry of Education. Okay? Now look at the budget for the Ministry of Agriculture. Why do you need that budget in Nairobi? Agriculture is devolved. All that money should be spread to the counties. Nairobi is policy. It should be having the least allocation. You are talking about the hair of the two. It should just be the same. So we can live within our means without borrowing if we accept to have sufficient love for our people.
There's a second question there. What do you do when the judiciary and the executive are in bed together?
Now what we are talking about is called state capture. State capture, you see the architecture of our governance is the executive, it's called the separation of powers. Executive, parliament, and the judiciary. The idea is they check each other because to avoid the excesses, to avoid overreach, okay? So the question is this, what do you do when the parliament goes to bed with the executive? When the judiciary goes to bed with the executive, what do you do? that is when a revolution is cooked. It's a very dangerous situation because you are now paralyzed. You see your aeroplane. Judiciary is your last line of defense. When everything fails, judiciary is supposed to stand with you. But when judiciary is gone, now it's just you and your God. And that is when people now start organizing revolutions. When they start organizing to operate outside the law. Fortunately for us, we have not reached there yet. I don't think we are there, and God forbid, we should never reach there. Judiciary should still continue playing its role. Parliament is already captured. In fact, if you remember, the Kenya Kwanza government, one of the promises was to establish a commission on state capture, which they never did. Because it would be wonderful to see how this happens. But as of now, I can't say that it has happened. Except there are two judgments which require people to tell judiciary no. One judgment was the one that declared the housing, so-called affordable housing unconstitutional, and then allowed that to continue. Then the other one is recently, which declared the recruitment of 1,406 Kenyans illegal, and then they did not nullify. Judiciary must always speak with the finality. Judiciary cannot afford to pronounce an illegality and then allow the illegality to continue. It must put an end to an illegality. So we are moving closer to state capture when you see judgment like that coming out of our judicial system. And we need not to pray, I'm not going to say you need to pray. I think you need to reactivate the civil society networks in order for the civil society to speak for you when it comes to state capture, because it's dangerous for the country.
Same questions, just quick remarks.
Yeah, thank you. What do you do when the executive and judiciary go to bed together? The framers of our constitution anticipated things like this. And I think the Constitution of Kenya is one of the documents that gives me a lot of hope. Because even with some of the challenges it has had, you have very forward-thinking kind of framing in our Constitution. You know, Article 10 that you're talking about, what are the values of our national values as a country? You know, what are the values of public service? What are the objects of devolution? Exactly. So when you think about the thinking that went into the framing of our Constitution, one of the things that was powerful was the power of self-representation. And there are mechanisms that exist. One of them is we can advocate on sanctions, because the sanctions that exist within the law, where you are able to actually use mechanisms, civic engagement platforms to advocate for sanctions that already exist in the law. I'll mention just a few sanctions, especially in the Public Finance Management Act and regulations. So one of the sanctions is, you know, if an entity is is having challenges with management of public services, withholding of funds can be undertaken. There is either reduction of budgets. We also have surcharging if you have authority to incur expenditure and you are found to have had misdemeanors around that can be withdrawn. We also have ineligibility to hold public office. You can be declared as unfit to hold public office, and we've seen those mechanisms. As an institute, we've been part of mechanisms of declaring Kenyans unfit to hold public office that we feel have failed this country in one way or another. Public interest litigation, the way the framers of our Constitution anticipated it, is that you don't need to have a lawyer to represent yourself in court. You can actually approach the court as an individual, as a lay person, and be able to adjudicate your case. And that's a provision that exists within our court. I think the best example I could give here is Okia Omutata, who has been to court over the years, but most Kenyans did not actually know that Okia is either in his third or fourth year of university. doing a law degree, so he's yet to even graduate. But he's done what he's been able to do, and many other Kenyans out there who have undertaken public interest litigation with great success. As an institute, for example, it's public interest litigation is something we've taken on, because even when you have the judiciary going to bed, it cannot be the entire judiciary. One of the things that we've seen in our framework is that there will always be a few good men and women, whether in judiciary, whether in parliament, whether in the executive. And that's how, for example, we've had, one of them is a CDF that we were petitioners in, that declared the CDF as unconstitutional. We are also been the petitioners of the case that Prof was alluding to here on the release of the SGR contract. We are the ones that went to court to declare the SGR contract be made public. We challenged the CAS appointments, which were declared unconstitutional. We've also supported the litigation against the housing levy and the finance bill last year, as well as the division of revenue in 2019. And we have many other examples of Kenyans who can tell you what Kenyans are doing. But allow me to just pause here and just give an example. I think the clearest I have seen, not just in Kenya, but even out there. I think in September last year, but around September there, I'd visited India, and we had many other people from other countries who had visited together. And when we were coming back to our respective countries, when we were in New Delhi, I remember when we got when I first went into the country and met some countrymen from Burkina Faso, and I was asking them, what has this country become? You have become a country that moved from Thomas Sankara to Blaise Compaoré. How did you sink that low as a country? And those guys told me something I keep to my heart. They told me that the Burkina Faso that you know, which means the land of upright men, has not, despite everything you're seeing, the country, there is a generation that is emerging of people who are going to take over their country, who are going to take back their country. And that was around 28th, 27th. Then on 30th, we were traveling back, and we were in New Delhi, and then they were traveling through Ethiopian Airlines, so they were going through Ethiopia and then to Burkina Faso, coming through, I think, Dubai. So before we departed, we got the news that their country had a coup. And all of us, you can imagine all of us from other countries who were all there worried for the Burkina base, and you're telling them, oh, we are sorry. And the guys were excited. And one of the guys I'd had a discussion with told me, Eric, you remember what I told you? That we have a generation of young people who are taking back their country. And I think every so often, and Mandela said it, that every once in a while, a generation will be called up to be great. You can be that generation. And I think we've seen Burkina Faso, for example, rise from the highest level of Thomas Sankara, gone down to Blaise, and now they are back. And I think that is what nationhood looks like. Every so often in this country, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where you have a government that is not working for your interests. It is your responsibility as a patriotic Kenyan to save your country from that government. And saving your country does not necessarily mean having a coup, no. It means ensuring that every time the president has an opportunity, or his ministers, they know that when they're trying to take the country off tangent, you can actually speak to that. And I think that's the example we've seen in this country. How we got a new constitution was not a walk in the park. There are Kenyans who labored for the constitution we have, and we can be the Kenyans who labor for the country and governance that we need to seek for. Are we able to finance our budget without borrowing? Yes, I think that's what we've been largely speaking about. If we are able to cut expenditure, move away from expenditure ceilings to zero-based budgeting, we would be able to finance our budget. Even if we don't get excess, we can be able to, at the very least, reduce our deficit in a way that in the medium term, we're able to run a balanced budget as a country. But it will take a lot of pushing back as citizens. We need to push back on supplementary budgets, because that's the new avenue that government has been using the last 11 years, where you have public participation in a budget cycle, and then you have supplementary budget where you come and approve after you have spent, which is actually a contravention of the law. So there are already those mechanisms. We need to push back hard on the government so that you're able to achieve the accountability safeguards that have been put in our constitution. Because if you wake up today and decide that you want to hold the government to account as a citizen, there's nothing new you need to do. You just need to go back to our constitution and you'll see provisions that can help you activate. Thank you.
All right, there was a question from Mary Kimani, our very last question from the floor. Mary Kimani, where are you? Mary?
Concerning the Eurobond issue, has it received any scrutiny or criticism from the society or from the opposition? And if any, has it brought any positivity to change the situation of the Eurobond debt?
Prof.
Yes. Unfortunately, I think as it received some push, yes, it has. I think Raila talked about it for a very long time. He said this money never came back. What did you do with it? He never got an answer. You see, the people who shouldn't get answers is, for example, you Mbunge. But they didn't. So the Uru's 10 years came and passed. He never gave an answer on the first Eurobond, which was 2 billion, which is the one now there, which is has got issues. So the citizens have demanded to know what happened because no money should be used outside the country. The government cannot amend the constitution by amending a parliamentary act, the Finance Management Act, which they did. They amended the Financial Management Act to allow them to use money outside Kenya, but you can't amend the constitution without the demands that all revenue raised by the Kenyan government, whether locally or internationally, must be surrendered to the consolidated fund. So amending the Finance Management Act did not amend the constitution. That means there is an illegality there. And good in government, when it comes, you can still hold them to account. But as it is right now, the people have raised the issue. The Auditor General raised the issue. At one time, we even went to New York, I think. The former Auditor General, what was his name? Oko. But of course, we have a government, we have the best constitution in the world, but we have a government that since 2013 is not living to that document. Remember, there's something people have forgotten. Mwai Kibaki ruled this country with the old constitution, but his governance was better than the one with the new constitution. I think you will agree with me on that one. So the issue here, like we said before, it boils down to only one variable: leadership of the country. We can make noise, we have been making. But when there is no response from the other side, we simply now surrender to waiting for a better tomorrow and then to raise those issues.
Our final question is more or less related to most of what we have talked about. And now I would like to contrast the two. In terms of, we've talked about the leadership problem. Is it the only issue that is leading us to the situation we're in debt? Or is there a problem with our structural framework that does not stop us or curb our appetite for debt?
Actually, we have two problems. First, we have, our government has a mind of its own. I want you people to understand that. There is something called consciousness. And there is something called collective consciousness. Just like the trees have a tree, and then in many trees you have a forest. So our government, we never had a Kenyan government. Okay? That's what the Kenyan government do. It will work 100% in the interest of the people of Kenya. So we have a government with a colonial mind. What was a colonial mind? It was exploitative. They saw you, the colonialists saw you as object for exploitation. That continued with the Kenyatta one, continued with the Arab Moi, stopped bravely with the Mwai Kibaki, came back with the Uhuru Kenyatta, and is going back now. That's why you can hear all this taxation. If you have taken economics, the basic economics, you know that you can't tax people who want to grow an economy. Okay? Because people need disposable income, you need to expand production, you need to be able to sell a surplus in order to expand the economy. You know that. But because you have a colonial mind, you need to collect money, so you will continue taxing. Now, question is, how do we deal with that colonial mind of the government so that we have a government of the people of Kenya? That is one thing we have not managed to do. So the other, because I said this is two part. What was the question again? I want to.
The question was, is it just a problem of leadership, or is there a structural problem?
So I said now the structural issue is what I've explained. That's a structural thing. That the government never sees itself as responsible for you, but it sees you as an object for exploitation. That's structural. Now the other problem, of course, is now the leadership. Okay? The leadership with the heart. The leadership that can cry for you because you have problems. The leadership that can feel the citizens' pain. The leadership with what is called the situational awareness. Again, we haven't been able to produce a leader. Trust me. In Kibaki, we came close. But all the others, I mean, Moi was a good person, actually, with a very good heart. But then he was intellectually challenged. Okay? So Moi was okay. Moi could have probably made one of the best presidents because he was a good person with the feelings. The leaders we have, they have no soul. So we need leaders with a soul. Can we produce those? The answer is yes. Because they are probably sitting right here. So we can produce the leaders who can feel us, who can feel when we are suffering, who can think for us, who, for example, will prioritize medicine in hospitals as opposed to houses. Because I'm not so sure anyone who lives, I don't know who, there was an old man I was saying in social media saying, ni nani ana kwao, okay? Priorities. So leadership is the second. One is structural. One, we have not winded ourselves from the colonial mindset. The other is producing people with a heart. People who can feel us. We have not been able to produce, whether it's UMPs, whether it's, we haven't been able to produce that.
Eric, same question. Leadership, we have all agreed here we have a problem with leadership. Is it the only thing, or do we also face a problem in our structure?
Yeah, I agree. It's not the only thing. It's not the only thing that's our problem. But maybe just to add, it's not just a leadership problem, it's a culture problem. Because when you have a culture of impunity, which I think does not go in tandem with a progressive framework that we have, when you have a leader who does not believe that they are accountable to anyone, there is no much action you would expect from that kind of person. Even if you look at, if you scale down to family level, if you're not accountable to other people apart from yourself, then it reflects in the decisions you make, in the guidance that you, in the leadership that you provide, and so on. And I think that's perhaps one of the biggest challenges we've had in this country, that you don't believe. So that when you look at the Constitution of Kenya 2010, everything that we were trying to do was trying to undo an imperial presidency that we had pre-independence and even after independence. We had a presidential system where it was the president was actually, believe it or not, the president would look at you, say, I like your coat, I'll give you a piece of land where this auditorium sits in this country. And so the mechanisms we saw even in the Kibaki time, as the prof was saying, things like trying to ensure that development goes, because one of the most defining documents in the history of this country was Session of Paper number 10 of 1965, which took on the Swinnerton Plan of 1954, and one of the idea was you divide the country into two parts, productive areas and unproductive areas. So that for the productive areas, you take development. For the non-productive areas, you don't take development. And we saw this model being adopted by successive governments since independence, where today, part of the challenges we are having with inequality and in our spaces can be attributed to the resource envelope and where it was channeled. And that's why devolution is important. Devolution is not important so that we have governors. It is important because of the idea of self-rule, that people can be able to decide the affairs of their own affairs without having to wait on the capital for direction. And I think that's why it's important. But the other problem we've had in this country is how we view capital. In business studies 101, we're taught about the four factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, right? And perhaps the most definitive of them there is capital, because but if you have those who, what we've seen, especially with the capitalism across the world, is they get to hire labor, get to own land, and get to drive enterprise. But the challenge we've had is even further, not just capitalism, but also crony capitalism, where you have primitive accumulation of capital, where by the time when you're coming in as a president or as a government, it is not so much what you will do for the country than what the country will do for you. That if your father or your mother became the president of this country, and 5 years later they have not amassed certain amount of wealth, you will actually be the first one to throw a stone to them because of how we view capital. This one was one of us. He got something, and idea. So you actually we look down on the people who do not plunder our country. Exactly. And the people who plunder our countries are the people that we celebrate. They're the people we stand, if they walk into this room, we stand for. Those are the people. And it goes back to the idea of how do we view capital? Do we view capital as something that drives enterprise, that drives economic growth? Or do we look at capital as something we take for ourselves, bury under the ground, so that it can help us? Never mind that that's a very primitive way of looking at it. And of course, the very tied to that is negative ethnicity. I think we've spoken about that. That's been a problem for this country for a long time. I invite us to check, to look for the book that documented the experiences of John Githongo in Kibaki's government. It's called Our Turn to It. And if you read that book, it will feel like deja vu. We are reliving those moments all over again. We have a people that have come into government, and there is that sense of it's now our time to eat before the time runs out. I think the very last challenge that we have in this country, I feel like we have not gotten to the crisis. When you get to a crisis where there is no longer, there is nothing for, we've not gotten to the level where the walls have come down. Because I think we almost got to that level. And when you actually go back to our history, the 2010 Constitution traces its roots back to the post-election violence. I think we had an opportunity to recalibrate, but one of the missed opportunities we had in this country was when we watered down the leadership and integrity from a moral threshold to a legal threshold, where now you can be walking around with a case on leadership and integrity on your shoulder, but you are declared innocent until proven guilty on the issue of leadership and integrity. When those who framed our constitution framed it under chapter 6 on leadership and integrity, it had a moral threshold. If we have aspersions on your character, you should be very far from a leadership position until your name is cleared. But what do? We look for the people who have cases on their shoulders. Those are the people now we are sending to parliament. They're the ones we send into executive. Exactly. So I think that's part of the challenges we are having, and I think it continues to make the problems that we are struggling with continue to be endemic.
Also, what the framers did in terms of the framers undermine chapter 6 themselves by inserting what you can describe as a gangster clause in the Constitution, Article 93, Subarticle 3, I think, Subarticle 3, Article 93, Subarticle 3 or 5, where it says that you should exhaust all avenues Meaning you can kill somebody right now and still be president of Kenya as long as the case is pending. Now that was wrong. Okay, so just to go back a little bit, why I think your country may not move unless what my colleague here said happens, that there's young people are willing to return us to normal, and I don't know what is our normal, is because everybody who is rich in this country, who you say is nearly everybody, except the one who are don't fall in this category, you can count them on your one hand. Okay? You are either worked with the government or trended with the government. Meaning that there is no new wealth being created. The climate does not allow creation of new wealth. So you are rich because you worked with the government, or you are rich because you trended with the government. Either way, there is no new wealth being created.
Thank you so much, panelists, for those remarks. Just very quickly, your final remarks as we end the debate. Eric, let's start with you.
I think my final remarks is, and I think I alluded to it, there's a storm coming. There's always a storm coming. For the country, I think there's a storm coming, and there's no one coming to save us. And if there's anything that we have learned from both our country and other countries like us out there, is that the price of democracy is eternal vigilance. So my urge to fellow countrymen is, let's continue to be vigilant. We cannot afford to wait until 5 years to come back to the stage to vote, but it matters. What is going to change this country is what we do between one election and another election cycle. I think there's a lot to be done for the country, and I think a lot of it lies on citizens to strengthen civilian oversight mechanisms to ensure that they are at the forefront of saving this country for their own benefit, but also for the benefit of generations coming after them. One of the questions that keeps me going. I have two boys. One is 5, the other is almost turning 2 years. And there's a day I asked myself, there's a day I was very hopeless with this country and the way things were going. And I asked myself, I imagined 20 years from now, when they asked me, what were you doing? Because you were there. What did you do? So I told myself, whatever I can do now, it is adding up to the answer that I will give them 15 years or 20 years from now. So even if not for your own sake, I think for the sake of those who are coming, even if you don't have children, there is a generation that is coming after you. For the benefit of not being able to be mum when they ask you that question, that thing that you can do in your own space, go and do it. Thank you.
Prof?
I would really say that we have a beautiful country. We have a wonderful country, and also we are not as bad as we look. There is a part of us which is fantastic. We have maintained peace since independence, and that has no price. You see the humiliation people get trying to go to other people's countries. Okay? I lived over there for 10 years. It's not a nice place. This place of ours is paradise. We need to defend it. We also need to understand that the leadership is not collective. It's actually individual. Meaning that any of you here who will rise up and lead us in the right way with integrity, that person can be our savior. We are not going to look for somebody coming from heaven. We are going to look for somebody coming right here. It can be done, and I'm persuaded that it will be done because we are not doomed. We are not cursed. We deserve a better country. We are going to make a better Kenya.
All right. That is the end of our final debate, where we're talking about how can citizens ensure the government is held accountable for acquired debt, with Professor Gitile Naituli, Professor of Management and Leadership. He also with him is Eric Kinaga, Head of Programs, the Institute for Social Transparency, TISA. We have been on a journey, and on this journey we've been discussing Kenya's Eurobond debt. And what is clear is that there is a need for transparency, a need for the government to be clear in terms of what loans we have, who we owe them to, and what that money actually did. The also important question that came up is, what can we do as Kenyans to ensure that we keep the government accountable? And the rallying call is for you and me to get involved to ensure that the government is actually accountable on every other debt that it has collected. Special thanks to all our panelists, our audience members drawn from Kenya Methodist University, KCA University, ZTech University, Multimedia University, and the Nairobi Institute of Business Studies, NIBS. This debate is brought to you courtesy of mwanzo.org in collaboration with Mwanzo Media. I am Mono Njuguna, editor at kenyans.co.ke. Let's keep talking online at Mono Njuguna, at Mwanzo Media, and keep this conversation that is patent to all of us and ensure that we find the right answers online. That's the end of our final debate. Asanteni sana.